Endymion and Daphne's story.
Endymion and Daphne were not lovers, but they did have a very important relationship with the immortals. And this is the story about Endymion. This young man, whose name is so famous, has a very short history. Some poets say he was a kind, some a hunter, but most of them say she was a shepherd. All agree that he was of surpassing beauty, and that was the cause of his unique fate. As Endymion guarded this flock of sheep, she, the moon Selene, often looked over him in love. She often came down to earth to caress Endymion and stare at this gratefulness in sleep. In all the stories about him, he slept forever, immortal, but never conscious. Night after night, the moon covered him with her kisses. It is said that this eternal slumber was her doing. She allowed him to sleep so as to be able to find him and caress him as she so pleased. But it is said too that her passion brings her only a burden to pain, fraught with many sighs. This is the story about Daphne.
Young lady, a love marriage, hating young hunters who are met with so often in mythological stories. She said to have been Apollo's first love. Daphne did not want any mortal or immortal lovers. Her father was the river god Pinos. Pinos grew tired because she refused the hand of all young men who wooed her, and often asked Daphne, "Am I never enough to have a grandson?" She insisted on being like Diana. He would yield, and she would be off deep in woods, hunters at work. But at last, Apollo saw her, and everything ended up for her. As she was hunting, Apollo began to chase after her, but seeing as she was a highly skilled runner, it took him some time. But as was expected, Apollo caught up to her as she reached the bank of her father's river. Bark began to form around her, enclosing her. Leaves set forth, she had been changed into a tree, a laurel. Apollo watched the transformation in grief and dismay. "O fairest of maidens, you are lost to me," he mourned, "but at least you shall be my tree. With your leaves my victors shall wreathe their brows. You shall have your part in all triumphs. Apollo and his laurel shall be joined together, wherever songs are sung and stories are told."
So now, let's proceed to the plot analysis. Exposition. Apollo's the god of the sun, so he was supposed to pull the sun every morning, and it was known that he would mock Cupid. For Endymion's story, Selene sees Endymion and falls in love. Rising action. Daphne's story. Cupid got mad and annoyed with Apollo and shot a golden arrow that made Apollo fall in love with Daphne. Cupid also shot Daphne with a lead arrow that made Daphne hate Apollo, and Cupid followed Daphne. Endymion's story. Beg for immortality, eternal sleep, and everlasting youth. For the climax. For Daphne's story, when Daphne is about to be transformed into a laurel tree by her father as she tries to escape Apollo's advances. Endymion's story. According to another version of the myth, Endymion's eternal sleep was a punishment inflicted by Zeus because he had attempted to have a sexual relationship with Zeus' wife, which is Hera. Falling action. For Daphne's story, Apollo called to Daphne that there was nothing to fear. Then he ran after her, and she grew more afraid all the time. For the little leaded point arrow was sticking in her heart, she ran till she came to the bank of the father's river, and she called on her fathers for help. Endymion's story, they want him to stay like that forever. For the resolution, for Daphne's story, it was known that Daphne had to sacrifice her body to avoid Apollo's motives for her. Endymion's story, every night Endymion sleeps, staying beautiful forever, and night after night the moon covered him with her kisses. So now, let's proceed to the moral of the story. For Daphne's story, it has been proved that love is not about who will you love or what age he or he might be, but it is about how wonderful love is and how will you feel the love when it was pure.
Even if you don't see each other anymore, the purity of love will always be there. Honesty and faithfulness are the keys of a long-lasting love. For Endymion's story, being greedy is a bad thing to do. God provided us with sufficient resources to allow us to survive and share what we have with those who are in need. God is always there to see the positive deeds we do for others, and He repays the favor by blessing us with more gifts in our lives. Being greedy in love doesn't make us happy. We're all worrying about our own happiness to meet our needs. Being greedy would make other people dislike us. Instead, we should think about other people's feelings because, as the saying goes, respect is earned, not granted. Thank you po.